Hello, family. BPD isn't confusing because it's rare. I'll show you. The numbers are actually quite astonishing and growing. It's confusing because it is intense, inconsistent, and it's often mislabeled. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I speak of this from an inside perspective as someone who has it and has been in recovery for 25 plus years for multiple issues. And I also speak as someone who has been on the receiving end of it. And again, I would caution anyone who is watching this series to make certain that you are aware of any offering you would like to make to the archive. We love having voices added to the archive because with this dis-ease in particular, and I say that dis-ease, you can say that about a lot of things in this world right now. With this one in particular, it is volatile as hell. And we all know that. Anybody that's been in contact with it in any way, shape, or form, particularly with someone who has had an episode of splitting, is certainly aware of that. So we speak in the language of love here. That is a prime directive. Any voices added to the archive will have that tone. That doesn't mean that you cannot express your heart. Absolutely. That is the purpose of this place, because our voices have been erased in large share across history. And so it is the purpose of this place to come together. And I am not the sum total of all knowledge by any means, but I do have access to all the voices who can help with that. And what isn't often known is that borderline personality disorder, which, by the way, the name is changing, the perception is changing, that label comes with a stigma attached. And it is maddening for both the sufferer. I've been out there in all these groups now doing a little bit of research, just watching. That's what I do when I'm doing research just before an episode if I don't have everything I need. And it's been overwhelming just to dip my toe into these groups of people who are screaming for help, screaming for validation, lost in their journeys. And there's very little of it out there. And in part, it is because it can be a legal issue for therapists. I'm not going to dive into that. Of all of the mental dis-ease, to my knowledge, this one is clearly among the most misunderstood, unbelievably high in suicide rates, which is another reason we need to address it and speak loudly and share your experience. Because it is so misunderstood and because there's not a lot of really good information out there, when you add your voice to the archive and your experience, we can start either validating patterns or you can share something that we haven't yet discovered. One of the largest reasons for recovery programs, quote unquote, success is that you can gather into a circle and speak, and there's no crosstalk, meaning you can speak in a safe space and say what you feel, and people don't respond to you. Each of us shares our own experience. That's why those circles work. You understand? And so that's why we do that here in the archive. We speak our truth and do it in the language of love. And I put a big qualifier out there because this is such a volatile subject, truly. Having said all that, let me show you what this is without the noise and without the labels and all the bullshit. In the United States alone, it is estimated that there are 6.4 million sufferers. Now, those are reported, right? So you can well imagine this is way under-recorded. And worldwide, 140 million people with this disorder. And I always do that because there are so many assets that come with regulated emotion when you have BPD. So it is truly one of the most misunderstood and underreported health conditions. So I share that with the folks in the room who have borderline personality disorder so that you know you are far from alone. Far from alone. And this is a safe gathering place for all of us. So the causes. Now, this is where I'm hoping to get some real discussion going on, because there are statistics out there on what are believed to be the causes. And I agree with what I have found to be the general consensus, which is there's a much higher rate of childhood trauma reported. I believe it's 14 times in those with BPD as opposed to those who did not have childhood trauma. When I first really started digging into this, I couldn't see how there'd be any exceptions, a rare exception maybe. But in my experience, it comes from an unstable childhood that causes a misfiring of the circuits. I guess that would be a really good way to describe that. So I couldn't understand, but I do agree with what I did discover, which is there are souls who are born sensitive. They are just more sensitive to begin with. And I absolutely agree with that. My son was a highly sensitive baby. I mean, from the get-go. My daughter was not. Nothing like that. So when I read that possibility in that a person wouldn't necessarily have to have a ton of childhood trauma, but be a very highly sensitive person who has been continually assaulted with traumatic noise, that made sense to me. And it turns out chronic noise is directly linked to cardiovascular disease, and it sends the blood pressure through the roof. So 40% of study participants in this particular study reported feeling chronic loneliness, and 69% reported needing more emotional support. When you blend all this in, I'm giving you some of these statistics to show you that this world we live in has bred horrific loneliness. It's not just you. And when you combine in the loneliness with childhood trauma and fear of abandonment, part of a great share of the symptoms of BPD are fear of abandonment. And that's a whole episode by itself. And those who learn that, the ones who stick, the pillars of your life, they know that, and so they forgive you your transgressions if you work on yourself. I hope that makes sense. And I'm fully aware that I'm speaking very slowly today, and some of you might have a lack of patience for that, and that's just too effing bad. This needs to be spoken with thoughtful consideration and care, this particular topic. So I'm going to play for you a little clip from the movie The Green Mile. And any of you who have ever seen that movie will remember this particular section. Absolutely. Those of you with borderline personality disorder will intimately understand John Coffey's plea.
I'm tired, boss. Tired of being on the road, lonely as a sparrow in the rain. I'm tired of never having me a buddy to be with, to tell me where we's going to, coming from or why. Mostly I'm tired of being ugly to each other. I'm tired of all the pain I feel and hear in the world every day. It's like these two pieces of glass in my head. It's like pieces of glass in my head. All the time. Pieces of glass in my head. Can you understand? All the time. Can you understand?
So that's what it feels like. Now, when I said a little while ago about wires, blown circuits, let me give you another visual. because this is what helps me the most. So in order for this living organism to continue on, those blown circuits have to be rewired, right? So this is a simple rewiring. And normally under non-traumatic, highly sensitive conditions where the person is not an empath, that's what the vast majority of BPD sufferers are empaths. The diamond in the coal empath. So for people like us, social interaction is a tax. It's not a bridge. When we get done with an event or an interaction, we oftentimes require rest. It's just the way it is. It's like a recharge. That's part of the wiring that was redone. So the reason this isn't universal across the board, even though there's a definite pattern, is because the wiring was repaired differently. And so while we all pretty much have this pattern of fear of abandonment, which is rooted in reality, and these intense emotional responses, the worst of which are called splitting, again, another episode. This is the rewiring that had to occur in order for us to continue living. It wasn't bad wiring. It was just rerouting from what would have been a different path. And so now it's a matter of rewiring it again. You understand, in order to regulate these emotions, it is required that we rewire. Now, that is not easy, and it takes very hard work and a long time, and it is very, very easy to go back into default. Boom, especially under stressful conditions. Hell, yes, it is. However, we can lessen the intensity, lessen how often it happens. We can, and the word is control. And I know people don't like to use that, but the word is control. We can control some of it, which then helps the rest of it. We live in a world that is constant stimulation, the majority of which is negative stimulation. That's just the reality. It's got nothing to do with our disorder. In fact, our disorder makes us hyper aware of it, which I guess makes us disordered. We're not just part of the matrix and plugged into the system, I guess. So the fact of the matter is, borderline personality disorder is a great deal more common than the vast majority of people understand. And it is coming to be known. I'll talk more about this in the next episode. In the DSM, which is what is used in the United States, it is still called borderline personality disorder, BPD. But the field is actively shifting on how it's understood. So in the global system, which is the ICD-11, it's no longer a fixed label. It's now personality disorder, and then in parentheses, with borderline pattern. Many clinicians prefer terms like emotional dysregulation disorder, interpersonality sensitivity disorder. Sounds like a 10-gallon word to me, frankly, or term. But the basic bottom translation is they're moving away from labeling the person toward describing how the nervous system works, because that is so much more accurate. It is simply a description of how our nervous system works, really. And so then we have to work with that nervous system. And yes, it's maddening. It's like somebody who had legs and then was in an accident and they were cut off. It's like that. It's not fair. It's not the life we would have wanted. The benefit, the massive benefit to mastering this nervous system wiring is that you have these incredible assets that get you so far in life. And had I learned this years ago, it would have saved countless pain and agony. I'm passing this on to you, and I'm asking you to share your experience. I don't claim to be the be-all, end-all. I do have a vast well of experience and knowledge. I have been a lifelong learner. I have actively sought recovery. I'm not perfect at it, but I've worked hard at it. So stick around. This is the place to find out. This is the place to hang out and be with your people, safely speak with them. Glad you stopped by.